Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Cindy Cornell, and I'm the career coach for working professionals at the Yale School of Management. And tonight, we're going to be talking about job targeting. And I'll be presenting to you a 3-point plan that I hope will help you as you think about your next career move. The same fundamental rules apply whether you're a newly minted MBA or a seasoned professional. You have to do the work. And currently, we're in a very interesting environment within a global pandemic. And some might think that it's harder to find a job. Let me assure you that I'm in coaching conversations every day with people who are navigating this successfully, negotiating offers, and in some cases, truly moving into roles that they are incredibly excited about. While we're here this evening, I would love for you to please focus on our time together. You're going to be muted, and I'd ask you to please use the chat box to say hello and or to share anything that might come up in the meeting. And we'll also be using the Q&A function to answer questions. There's a chat box for that as well, or a Q&A box for that as well. If there's follow-up questions that aren't answered today, we are going to try to wrap up in about 5 minutes before the top of the hour. Please feel free to make a coaching appointment with me, and you can do that through the alumni portal. Today, we're going to explore how to set yourself up for success by clarifying your targets, by thinking about how to use your network in ways that are going to open your eyes up to new opportunities, a little bit about where to put research into your plan, and how to craft tailored messaging that piques employers' interests. You want them to be curious about you, to learn more. And as I said before, I will try to leave time at the end for questions, so please think about what you might want to share here. So we do have the 3-point plan, putting it into practice, responses to some common objections, and I will be building on some ideas that we've talked about in prior webinars. So if you, through this presentation, see something that might be in bold and red, you might refer back to other recorded webinars. And again, you can find those in the career resources on the SOM alumni portal. So why are we here today? I suspect a few of you are looking for a new role. And I'd like to encourage you to shoot for a bullseye. I'll share a photograph in this presentation a little later. I remember a time when my son was learning archery at camp, and he was quite a young person at that point in time. And it was very funny. There was this big line of targets set up, and the kids were kind of willy-nilly on the first day shooting at any target. And that's a little bit about how I think a lot of people focus on job search. They're shooting for anything, and they're not getting really, really clear about what they want. And it's hard to get a bullseye. You might hit the target. It might not be the one that's going to really make you happy. And I'd like to give you permission and ask you to give yourself permission to look for that bullseye for yourself. Some people don't actually know what the bullseye is, so that's a piece of what we'll talk about today as well. A fundamental truth to all of this is that great roles exist. I'd love you to start thinking about making notes about, on pen and paper. You relate with those types of notes differently than you do when you type. What do you love to do? What types of people do you enjoy working with? What kind of impact do you want to have in the world? What do you want to be known for? And just for a moment, if you think about these things and being in a role that you really love, like I really love what I get to do here in terms of helping successful leaders like yourselves get out of your own way so that you can have the impact in the world that you're meant to. I love this work way more than I ever did when I was doing things that I was doing at the beginning of my career with my accounting undergrad and my finance and marketing MBA from Stern. I'm proud of those things, and they set me up well to be able to do this work. But I didn't love those roles that I had in those other companies as much as I really love this one. And I'd love you to think about what might that feel like if you had that for yourself. So we'll dive right into the 3-point plan. It's math. I want you to think about what your offer is and who might need what you're offering. And if you do work that you love for the company or companies that you, the types of companies that you're thinking about researching and working with, what kind of we are you going to feel? Are you going to feel like a part of a team where you are thriving, or are you going to just be in a job where you're kind of getting by? So be thoughtful about what's the purpose and impact you'd like to have. When you know what you want to do and what you'd like to share, the kind of impact you'd like to have, it's easy to start talking with people and exploring what opportunities might be around. And I encourage you, as you're looking at this plan, not to start with the target companies. So many people start with the target companies. I'd love you to start, please, with something more about yourself, what you'd like to offer, and how you'd like to have an impact, what it feels like to be in that type of environment. Some environments drain you, and some environments energize you. And you need to know what the difference is between the two so that you can very thoughtfully target companies that are going to align with your values and align with the way you like to work and set you up to truly be happy and successful. We'll start in with me. What's your offer? What do you love to do? There's a lot of things that I know how to do that I did not include in my resume when I applied for this role at SOM. And some of you might already have heard this story. I'll share it again though, because it bears repeating. It's worth repeating. I wasn't looking for a job when I got this job. Actually, a friend of mine reached out to me, texted me in fact. She had just started in the EMBA class of 2020. And she said, I found the perfect job for you. I was very confused as to what it was. And a little while later, I got an email with the job description and I read through it and I was like, wow, this job was made for me. My friend knows enough about me to know that I could have an impact here and to know that I'd be able to resonate with the students that I work with in the executive MBA program and the alumni that I work with across the world. And I wouldn't have to do my math around the Black-Scholes option pricing model that I learned back in my MBA, or I wouldn't have to do fund or lease accounting that I learned in my undergraduate degree when I studied accounting. Those things weren't on the resume. I included things on the resume that I did want to do again, and things that I would be happy to offer enthusiastically. Hopefully this is starting to get you some idea about how I want you to think about your job search. Many of us have beliefs about what we should be doing. I like to say in coaching that we don't should all over ourselves. We might have felt passed over in the past. We might think that we're not going to be considered for a role. Those are stories. I'm excited for you to get excited about your own personal story of wild success. And the only person that's going to write that is you. If you've ever had a coaching appointment with me by Zoom while I was in my office at SOM, you would have seen this drawing on my whiteboard behind me. Since I've been working from home, I actually drew it on a piece of paper that I occasionally will hold up in a Zoom meeting when I'm talking to somebody in a coaching call. I want you to think about what your zone of genius is. And again, starting with what's the job and what are the companies that you want, that's kind of a dollar sign. And I don't want you to start over in that space. I want you to think about what are the things that you absolutely love doing, that you would bounce out of bed every day to do. Some of those things you might get paid for and some of those things you wouldn't necessarily get paid for. Dive in a little bit more and ask yourself, what is it about those things that I enjoy doing, that I enjoy? And often it's a really interesting opportunity to put together some of the characteristics of things you like to do in different ways and bring those exercises into the work that you might do. There's also some things that you might not want to do. I was really paid well when I was doing things like finding the out of balance in a discounted cash flow analysis, or responding to Q&A for analysts as I was taking on responsibilities in investor relations in a public company. Those things didn't actually make me as happy as some other things. So really thinking about what are the things that you do enjoy and what are you known for is really important. The what are you known for, that's the star, may not be things that you see as superpowers for yourself. And I want you to get clear about what other people, how other people see you. That's going to help you a little bit down the road when you think about how you want to market yourself. So love you to think about your intersections when you're clarifying your me part of this 3-point plan. I'm doing this in a little bit of a different order. I'm starting from me and then I'm going to we. When we think about we, I would love you to think about the types of organizations that you've really enjoyed and done well in. And I also want you to think about, and I probably, I'm sure that you all probably have a couple of these examples. What are the types of organizations that you haven't thrived in, or that you didn't find enjoyable, or you didn't feel camaraderie, you didn't feel supported? You might have felt a bit on edge, or that you had to have a personal, you had to put up a screen about who you were and you couldn't be authentic. Making lists of both of these are going to help you to ask thoughtful questions so that the companies, when you research them, and you might research them either via online, what they might be saying on social media, what others might be saying about them in the news, and also in discussions with employees who are there. Or sometimes it's cool to talk to people who used to be there, because you'll get an idea and they might feel a little bit more comfortable with being candid with you. I also want to encourage you, as you're thinking about researching and thinking about the types of companies you want to be in, how do you play with people? How do you intersect with people? And that's going to help you to also become much more clear about what you'd like to do and the types of organizations or teams that you'd like to work with. Some organizations are structured in very collaborative ways and some are not. Some are very siloed. So these are things for you to think about and make notes for yourself so that you can then go to the next piece. Who? Those are your targets. So now that I know what I'd like to share and I have an idea about the types of companies that I might like to share my work with, I can start being curious. Please be careful, because we tend to look, when we're doing this by ourselves, for what we know in the places we've already looked. Those of us who might have mislaid things around our homes know we tend to look in the same couple of places for things that we might have misplaced. In the job search, people tend to look on certain job boards. One thing I can tell you is that, especially during this strange time of global pandemic, there's some new jobs out there and there's some new ways of doing things. And companies who are looking for workers are looking for architects, people who are going to help them to navigate through this global social, economic, political disruption through to the other side. So the things that might have been valued before all of this happened are not necessarily going to be the things that are going to be valued on the recovery side of a global recession. So think about what you're looking for and wondering whether you're looking to put yourself in a box, or whether you're in a space to really talk about the types of skills you'd like to share. The other really interesting thing, especially as we grow, is that the jobs that you may be prepared for may not be the types of jobs that are put up on job boards or LinkedIn. They are often the types of jobs that you network into, where it never gets posted anywhere, that the people who are seeking are talking to their networks to find the right types of candidates. And in some cases, the jobs are being created, co-created with the person who's moving into the job. A long way of saying break out of your current box thinking and ask other people, what do they see? This is actually how I became a coach. I was in an operations finance role, and I was fortunate enough to be let go in a large reorganization. And you might say, well, how is that fortunate? That put me on this path. The reorganization actually had a name. It was quite interesting. It's called Project Rapid Growth. And from that, I achieved my own rapid growth. And I found this new career. How I found my way to it is quite funny, because it wasn't something that I would have found I would have found easily. The story as it goes is, as I asked a few folks what I might do if it weren't this financial role that I had, more than one person said, you should be a coach. And I looked at them quizzically. I said, thank you for the feedback. Can you help me understand? I'm athletic, what sport? And they hadn't actually meant that, they meant this. So what was quite funny is that they saw these characteristics in me. And because I had these stories, I hadn't studied human resources. And it wasn't that coaching at the time that I was aware of was much more punitive as opposed to developmental. It wasn't something that I was interested in getting involved with. And when I was prompted to, when I was encouraged to, and people told me why they thought that this would be a great role for me, it was then that I was able to kind of connect all of the dots and say, you know what, you're right. Even when I was at Deloitte, where I started my career, I was doing things like I was on the audit technology task force when we were launching computers for the first time. It's crazy to think that that happened in just such a few number of years ago. But at the beginning of my career, we were moving from pen and paper to computers. I was training new staff people when they came in about audit processes and communications. And I was always doing these types of developmental things, even then as a very young staff person, right out of college. So it made sense. So I'd ask you to go back and think about, what are the things that you gravitate towards? What do you enjoy doing? Those things may influence or help you to break out of some old thought habits and open up your eyes to what could be possible for you. So continuing forward, you can also play around with the math. You could start with what's the type of company I want to work with, and what's my offer, and that'll take you out to who you might work with. So you don't have, start where you want and play with this model however you'd like to, as long as, please, you make sure that you focus on you. So I'd like to shift our focus here, now that I've shared a little bit here about the buckets of thought I want you to put into your search, and play with how to do this. First of all, I want to remind you that jobs aren't hidden. And in fact, I talked about this in the alumni webinar in June. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can peek at that webinar. And you can find that on the career resources page, as I mentioned before. I want you to look differently. I want you to think about your perspective. Are you in the forest, or can you take a different vantage point? If you knew your amazing job existed already, you might already be in it. And I also want to remind you that many job seekers don't find their next amazing job through somebody who's a close connection. They find their next amazing job through people who are second or third degree connections. So networking is incredibly important. And I did do another webinar on networking during the age of social distancing back in April of 2020. So that might be another webinar that might give you some new ideas. When you do find a role that you're really excited about, please pause. So many people get excited and they quickly get their application together, they send the resume through. I'd like you to take a step back and really let's audit it a little bit. It's a hypothesis that this would be a great job for you. And I want to make sure that you do enough work to know that you really do want it. And if you do really want it, it's worth doing a little bit of effort to network and research so that it's easy for that applicant tracking system, if that's the way you go through, or for the recruiter to notice you, to have you stand out from the crowd and say yes to you and invite you in for an interview. I also want you to think about what does it look like? Most job descriptions are poorly written by people who haven't done the job. If you think about it, if a job description's never been written before, it's likely being written by a manager who's overworked, overwhelmed, trying to do a couple of things at once, and it's talking about high-level things, and it's not necessarily getting into the skills that are required to truly be successful in the role. Successful job seekers take the time to really say, what is this job about? How does it add value in the organization? With whom does it interact? When you do that, you're really quite well prepared to have interviews with all of those folks who you're likely to meet along the way. Some jobs ask for something or equivalent experience. I'd love you to think about what that might mean. You might not have exactly that experience. If you have what would be considered equivalent experience, it's basically saying that there's something that they're trying to protect themselves from. There's a risk that if you don't have the experience, you wouldn't be able to do something well. So let's think about what is that thing you want to do well, and let's come up with a couple of really wonderful stories showing how you do have the requisite experience to step into the role that you're doing. Talk to people who've done the job. Doesn't even have to be at the same company. That's going to help you to understand a bit more too. And when you do get in there for an interview, they're going to be impressed that you seemingly know more about what needs to happen than they do. And that might accelerate the process for you a little bit. Please be diligent in your research. Some of the things that you're thinking in your head are actually stories. It's kind of like a silly example I use, but people find resonant. It's like dating. Finding the next new job is kind of like finding your next great relationship. And you wouldn't actually counsel a friend who's looking at a dating profile and says, oh, I love that one. That's the person that's going to marry me. You'd say, no, slow down. We need to get to know each other a little bit better. Take your time. Make sure that they're really the right ones for you. Don't settle. I would ask you to use the same advice for yourself here. Making it real. I do want you to think about a thoughtful communication strategy. You want to speak to people where they are, when they are. What do they care about? Your brand is really important. Your resume is a marketing document. Please think about it more as a eulogy than as a tombstone. It's not necessarily helpful to share with people, and people do this all the time. Please don't share everything you've ever done, giving them the opportunity to pick and choose and see if they could maybe figure out if you'd possibly be able to do this. Please think about what they're looking for and highlight relevant experience, not all professional experience, but relevant experience to the role that you're applying to. This means you're going to have to take some time to tailor your resume. I'd rather you take the time and tailor it and get the interview for something that you're really excited about than to send 1,000 resumes out for roles that you're maybe not interested in. Your hit rate's going to be a lot better doing the few and getting more interviews. Your brand, I talked about your personal brand in other CDO webinars. You can find these also on the career resources page. I did that one in May. And I also want you to think about the research that you do. You're in a space of showing people who you are and what they could expect from you if you were actually working with them on their team. you're going to potentially have to open up and be a little bit vulnerable with people, letting them know what you are looking for and what you're not looking for. That's really kind of critical. To engage in this deep work is helpful, and it also is really important for building trust and rapport, which is needed if you're going to, through networking, for example, be introduced to other people in an organization. Here's another hint. Please don't think, while it's a wonderful thing to be introduced to it's a wonderful thing to be introduced to a CEO, for example. It's also really useful to be introduced to people who are at lower levels in the organization. And this is because you can kind of work your way through the organization, and you can ask what might be more novice questions to younger people, to lower levels. So by the time you do get up to the top of the food chain, to the decision makers, you're really, really well informed, and you understand the interdependencies and also the language of the organization. So take your time, and these hints are going to help you to make it real. Translation is really key. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and we talked about plating up, if you would, if we think about food, meals that would be really appetizing to people. And this person had worked in a bunch of, and lived in a bunch of different countries. And if you lived in the Caribbean, and if you lived in Asia or India and the UK and the US, and you thought about one of your most favorite meals and you served it up to somebody else in another country, they might look at it and say, what's this and what am I supposed to do with it? So you really want to think about what's your audience hungry for? What's their appetite? You want to share with them in ways that pique their interest. Again, here's another webinar that we've done, and I'm referring a lot back because this is, kind of pulling it all together in a way for you. I talked about powerful storytelling in July, networking in the age of social distancing back in April, reimagining your career in May. And when you're really thoughtful about your messaging and you're personal with people and you develop relationships and it's long-term as opposed to transactional, hey, I'm looking for this job, can you talk to me, can you connect me with someone, versus I'm interested in what you do and can we talk about it, in ways that allow you to have a really rich and robust dialogue, you're gonna get a lot farther a lot faster. In terms of messaging, I want you to think about what's simple. Again, if you're networking, people are gonna be sharing you want them to be able to remember it. You want it to be resonant, language that is meaningful to them, perhaps uses some of their own company's vernacular, relevant to the role and to what you're speaking about, and repeatable. Again, they can share this easily with other people along the way. Another way to think about this is who's your audience and what's keeping them up at night. They're going to be particularly interested if they understand that you know how you might actually be a solution to that problem. So a couple quick examples here. The traditional way, everything you've ever eaten in every type of establishment on every continent, the table is full. I don't know about you, but if you've ever gone to a buffet, it sometimes can be overwhelming. And some of the things on the buffet aren't appetizing, and it's hard to choose what you might want. And it's also common for some people when they go to a buffet to overeat. There's too much and they don't feel good after the meal. Whereas you could go to a 5-star restaurant and there's a very tailored presentation of things that you're delighted to eat, and it's just enough. So I'd encourage you to really think about those appetites again and prepare a tailored presentation. Hopefully this metaphor helps you to remember this a little bit differently. Another one, you might know about IMDb. That's the International Movie Database. And you can look up any movie and you can find out what the movie is about. It will be descriptive, though probably not terribly engaging. Reading an IMDb description is not going to have you on the edge of your seat saying, I want to see that movie. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to learn more about that. And that scene. And oh my goodness, I want you to kind of think about how do you generate excitement and buzz where your resume or your messaging is like a sizzle reel of your very best clips. And you're thinking about it from an experiential story perspective. Again, the best stories are those that people can see themselves in. So if you tell people all about all the things that you've ever done in the companies that you've worked in the past, there's no place for that person that you're talking to participate with you. Oh, that's nice. They're very smart. They've done a lot of things. Versus really showing them, versus telling them, showing them how you problem solve. Setting things up in ways where you're explaining the dilemma that you faced or the challenge that you overcame and the thought process and the teamwork that you employed to do that. They can participate in that and say, oh my gosh, I need that. I want to learn more. Last little idea on that. It's hard to cut a preview until the film is in the can, right? The film has to be done. And that's an old reference when film used to be film and not digital. The film has to be complete to come up with a compelling preview. So you really do need to do this research. It's hard for you to kind of have a standard resume where you're pulling bullet points off and saying, oh, I'm just going to reorder them. Because, you know, I don't know about you, I have a 14-year-old and the movies that he wants to watch, the movies that I want to watch are often very different. Sometimes they're the same. But even how you might present the preview would be different to get different people to say yes. So could be the same story and you're showing it from a slightly different angle. Again, it's going to depend on who you're talking to and what they need and what they care about and how you want to interact with them. That's going to set up how you in fact want to present yourself in your resume or in your presentation, in your dialogue. Appropriate audiences, again, not all audiences. This preview, this set of communication, this is for this audience, not everybody. The quote here is from Jordan Belfort, who's the author of The Wolf of Wall Street. Moving out of practice and into overcoming objections. Again, reminding yourself that there are amazing jobs out there for you. The only thing standing in the way of your goal is the story you keep telling yourself about why you can't achieve it. Really helpful for folks to be thoughtful about what's in the way for you. And I want you to be thoughtful also about whether or not there's evidence to support that. If in a coaching conversation you share with me that, oh, this always happens and I'm not, this is a problem. I might ask you, well, that's not my experience of you. I'm not with you 24/7, but that's not what I've experienced here with you. I'm curious, would you share with me some specific examples of where this has happened in business or in life? And oftentimes people quizzically think about it and say, I can't think of any specific examples. In those cases, oftentimes it's a story that we've said so often to ourselves that it feels true. So it may be ourselves holding ourselves back, as opposed to there being a real objection that we need to work through. Could be ageism, could be the glass ceiling or the boys club or the gap in your resume that you had when you were taking care of your kids or your parents or whatever. It could be that women are hired for experience and men are hired for potential, or it could be that those people that you tried to work with in the past just weren't your people. And that you haven't kind of connected the dots for your audience in a way that's really compelling to them. Or it could be that you haven't really thought about what you want and you're not sharing your gifts and your ideas enthusiastically where they think that you're really excited about them because you've got this story in the background. Lots of things can hold us back. So if you can try to think about what do I think might be holding me back, and if you want some help with this, you're welcome to reach out and have a coaching conversation again with me, and I can help you to try to think through these things. A lot of these things are beliefs, and I do want to help you to proactively overcome objections. Here's a couple of common questions. People say, I can't get through the applicant tracking system. Well, sometimes we haven't tailored our resumes well enough to get through them. So really understanding LinkedIn, for example, and understanding keywords. There's a wonderful course listed in the career resources that's actually free for SOM alumni. Landing your perfect job with LinkedIn. I took it about 1.5 years ago. I found it to be wonderful. A ton of really wonderful information that I didn't really understand. My profile wasn't bad, but how the algorithm and the AI worked behind all of the profiles and how recruiters might use it, those are going to be really interesting things that are going to help you. Also going around them through referrals, finding people from your undergraduate institution, from SOM, former colleagues that work for or know people who work for the companies. It might be, you know, my way into SOM was the friend that I mentioned is somebody that I knew from our kids 10 years ago when they were in preschool. Wasn't somebody even from work. So it may be your neighbor or your neighbor's husband or cousin that is going to help you to go around those applicant tracking systems. Just an example. This is a wonderful one that I get all the time. My resume is great, but I'm not getting any bites. Because, you might say, because I'm too old, I'm too whatever. In this case, we need to actually step back and say, if you're really excited about your resume and you're not tailoring it for anyone, you've written your resume for you. And you haven't actually written it for your audience. You're not using it you're using it as a diary, maybe more than you are as a marketing document. So we really want to think about your mindset and your stories and understand that you will get what you focus on. So if you think that the job's not there, or you're not good enough, or that they're not going to say yes to you, or they're not going to look at your resume, I guarantee you that's likely what's going to happen. And you are in more control of that than you think you are. Couple more common questions. I'm disconnected from the job market. I've been out of work for a long time. I had a gap year, or I was taking care of family, or it's 2020. And, you know, there's a meme that's circulating right now that said, you know, there's a gap in your resume in 2020. And, you know, what were you doing? And the answer was, I was washing my hands. So like, there were some people that are taking a gap year. My story with that one is own it. That's okay. Own it. And understand that you're not just sitting around. Likely you might be taking courses. You might be hiking a lot. I know somebody who has set a goal to hike a significant portion of the Appalachian Trail. And that takes some period of months, or training for a marathon or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a big, ugly gap. You get to tell the story. If your story is that it's a big, ugly gap, that's what's going to come through for other people. So I'm coming up to the end here, and I'm going to wrap up in a few moments, and we'll move into some more questions to the extent that there are some. You are always going to be to something for someone. Hopefully many of you have laughed at Steve Martin over the years. Be so good that they can't ignore you. The people that don't want you maybe aren't your people, and that's okay. So you might want to pick different people who would be really excited about your personality, who is curious about your about who you are and what you like to do, and are you self-aware enough of your own preferences to know how you like to work, so that you can select into or say, no, thank you. That's not an environment in which I think I'm going to thrive. Knowing about yourself and knowing about others, asking questions where they show you, not tell you, that your values are in alignment with theirs is really important. So that's, again, work that is, you know, questions that you need to ask. Bringing us back to the plan and what we've covered. You have an offer, and I'd like you to think about the types of companies that you could put that offer together with, who you could do work for and contribute to, where there's an amazing an amazing impact with purpose, that you do actually have that bullseye that you're excited about. along the way, it might not go exactly as you plan. That's okay. We learn from those things. I have this conversation with people all the time. I had a conversation with someone recently about a difficult boss. And we stepped back and said, what is there to learn about this person and your relationship with that person? My experience, having been around the world a few times, having had a few spins around the sun, is that until we learn those lessons, the universe will keep bringing them back to us. So don't think that escaping this bad situation is going to solve the problem. You're likely to be served it up again in a different flavor. So think about how you want to continue to move forward as a lifelong learner. I actually did share with the current EMBA students just this week via one of our internal messaging systems, a 2017 article from Harvard Business Review that talked about leaders as learners. And, you know, even just looking at this year, who could have expected 2020 to be the way it has been? And we have a lot of questions, and we have a lot of uncertainty about what's going on and what will happen next. So I really would love you to think about how a learning mindset, a growth mindset, if we want to think about the work of Carol Dweck, and you could even peek at her TED Talk about growth mindset, how that serves you from a perspective of failing again and failing better. So in terms of, you know, kind of finishing up today, we talked about the introduction. We talked about putting it into practice. We talked about some objections. I see that Kayla has been helping with some logistical questions about where to find some of the resources that I've mentioned. So thank you very much, Kayla. She is the behind the curtain person in our alumni relations group who's helped to organize all of these. So I can't do it by myself, and it's important to have a team behind you that you can trust and support. So that's something that I want you all to find in your next roles as well. People to work with that you enjoy. So that's where we've been. And here's a couple of other resources in terms of thinking about what else you might use. In addition to all of these things that we've talked about that you can find online, your own journaling, your own ideas, capturing them, looking for trends, and again, writing, looking for trends and intersections, your own tailored Boolean Google searches based on curiosity. It's quite interesting how much you can find through a little research. Playing on LinkedIn, thinking about what types of groups are out there, who's innovating, who's on the cutting edge, following them, reading articles that lead you to new places. Again, I'm going to ask you, please, to be optimistic about what's possible for you. You're well trained, you have skills, you've gotten some great outcomes in the past, you're successful. We're looking for new places and new ways to be differently successful, and you get to drive that. Are things a little bit more challenging today? Well, they're different for sure. Companies are appropriately taking a step back to figure out how to compete in this post-pandemic world. One of the things I know that older employees know is, and I mentioned this earlier, what's valued on the recovery side of a recession is often very different from the past. Look at 2008 and the financial crisis. There's a lot of people in banking that were not in 2009 making the types of salaries they were making in 2008, and those jobs are gone forever. The economy is not valuing those types of roles anymore. Successful job seekers are differentiating themselves by showing, both by their behavior and by their intentional tailored language, the role they could play in innovating towards the new future for that company or for the world, whatever that might look like in your industry or what you're interested in. You want to architect not only through, but beyond, right? And innovate to what's possible. And your research, again, about each company, opportunity, while considerable work facilitates that really important translation into language that your targets are going to find resonant, they're going to be curious about, and they're going to be drawn to. You're going to help them to understand how you, through your language, you layer in and leverage in-demand skills that they care about with your relatable prior impacts that they can understand. Helping hiring companies to imagine you as a valuable member of their own team. And I know you can all do that. And I also know it's a lot of work. And again, if we're shooting for that bullseye, it's worth it. So let's pause here and see, are there questions? And I'll start to peek through those now. And I'd love to know also if you want to share in chat, if there's things that you found particularly useful, or things maybe that you might want to hear about in future webinars. That's useful as well. So looking at the 2 open questions, I have a long gap year doing meditation every day for 1.5 years, ready to get back to workplace. Own the gap, right? What are my suggestions on a good explanation? I'm not sure the circumstances. You might have worked for a very long time and you've given yourself a self-imposed sabbatical. You've visited friends, you've traveled. If you work well and you've planned for it and you financed it, own it. I suspect that there's a lot of people out there that would say that they're a little jealous that you did that you took that time. In terms of what you might have done, what have you learned? That might be something. What do you know about yourself? Or what did you work on while you were in meditation? In what ways are you differently able to or elevated in terms of your capabilities to provide support to an organization? I might also think about what you did to keep current, if anything. Did you take other courses? Were you focusing in on other areas? As we grow, as we ascend in responsibility, we are less tactical in our responsibilities and much more responsible for being self-aware, being emotionally intelligent, and being able to relate with other people. And that may have been a part of your experience. So whatever your gap is, and for whatever reason it was, own it and share with it and let people know that, in fact, I am excited that I had that opportunity, and I am really excited to get back to work. And here are the ways that I believe I can add value to your organization. And if you've done your research about the organization, it's going to be easy for you to express enthusiasm towards that. So hopefully that helps that question. I'm looking at the next one. Could I know if I don't have any related experience, for example, in marketing, how could I stand out from the candidates who already have a marketing internship, for example? So this is where equivalent experience comes into play. You might not have had a marketing internship, and I'm not sure if the marketing internship is going to really give in-demand skills for the role. So this is where I'd step back and really get thoughtful about what does the role require and what are the outputs for the role. And you might find that it was something that you did when you were in elementary school. Maybe we were having a conversation earlier today on my team about Girl Scout cookies. Maybe you sold cookies or popcorn or something else, or maybe you were involved with some organizational or townwide, kind of new projects or volunteer work or things like that, where you were getting the word out for not-for-profits or something like that. Marketing experience is about influencing people in language that they find resonant. So one, you want to show your potential employer that you know what they would find resonant, and two, you just want to find examples that don't necessarily pertain directly to a marketing internship that you don't have. It's really going back to what you do have. So I know a friend of mine from high school I had coached years ago, and when in the conversation, she had been a cheerleader, and I was like, this role is really asking for a cheerleader. And we talked about kind of what the role required and who she was working with and how she was encouraging people. And that was a relatable story that she shared in her interview, and she got the job because they understood that this is just how I show up and how I always have shown up. So those types of things might be useful. I'm assuming that if you're an SOM alum and you have a specific question like this, you can make a coaching appointment with me and we can walk through it and try to understand a little bit more directly for you. So please don't hesitate to make a coaching appointment if you can, if you're an SOM alum. Looking at the next couple of questions so we can hopefully finish up here soon. I've moved among a variety of different roles, and I've tried different industries out, unpaid, paid. I look at these things from a perspective of skills acquired, like a toolbox. And there's a story for you to put together in terms of how each of these experiences was useful for you and what you learned and how this positions you really well for the next role. If you share everything, it might not be helpful when you want to tailor your resume and leave out some things. Yeah, you could. I mean, am I going to look erratic if I put too much out there? I think there's a story that you could even include in your about section about how you've been exploring and about how what you've learned and how these all come together. One of the things that I have in, if you look at the SOM resume template that's included in the career resources, there's a summary statement that people can use. And you might adopt something like this in your about section or even in your LinkedIn headline. This is 50 words, what I'm about to read. And hopefully this helps to answer this question a little bit. Often seasoned professionals or young people who are doing their career seek to leverage previous skills uniquely in a new role or industry. A summary statement is an effective way for the reader highlighting briefly in 50 words or fewer the intersection of prior experience and success with future goals and desired impact. So we could step back and look at the things that you've learned and how that has influenced what you know you'd like to do today. But that's, again, up to you to craft that story and put that forward to create context for the beginning of the conversation in your relationship with that potential employer. You might also think about the other side of your question. What would look erratic? And checking yourself to make sure that you're showing up the way you want to and not the way you don't want to, and really thinking about it from their point of view. I worked for 4 years and I'm looking for a career change. I find it hard to filter and find the right long-term career direction fit. You know, it's sometimes hard to think about the next step in front of you, and it's sometimes easier to think about a longer term. I mentioned, you know, tombstone versus eulogy. I wonder if you were to think about something closer to the end of your career, what do you want to be known for? I don't suspect I'll be remembered for any specific job I've held. I do suspect that I'll be remembered by people for the impact that I had on them and how I helped them to think about their life differently and how I helped them to see themselves differently. It's not so much about the job. What do you want to be remembered for? A question I ask parents often is, in 5 years, in 10 years, how do you want your children to talk about you? Because our kids are going to learn about work by watching us. What do you want them to say about what you do and how you add value to the world? We can then look out at some interval that's farther away and do a gap analysis and say, what skills do you have today? And what skills do you need to grow? And experiences do you need to have to be well positioned to take on those roles? A simple example I might give is a young person who graduates with a degree in finance or accounting and says, oh, someday I'd like to be a CFO. They're enamored with strategy and consulting, and they want to go right into that. Well, they might find it hard to find a CFO role later on because they've never managed treasury and cash functions, which is really an important role for a CFO to have. So really, sometimes if we think farther out, it might help us to see different paths to achieve those things. And we might measure if we're getting closer to those things. Last question and we'll wrap up. I'm looking to change fields and I'm opening to taking an entry-level job. This is an important one. You have a tremendous amount of experience, and I don't know who you are and what you've done, but you have a tremendous amount of experience, and there's value to that. So you want to think about what you can bring in and how you can leverage that. Certain roles, it may require a starting, a lower level starting role. I'd love you to think about it though, maybe more as an internship, and thinking about, there's relaunch programs sometimes for different companies. There's different maybe project consulting work you could take on to get the lay of the land so that you can actually build the bridge to ascend a little bit higher. Each person's different. Each path is different. Please don't settle, and please don't think that you need to start over. If you're wanting to become a brain surgeon mid-career, you're probably going to have to start at the beginning. For most of the rest of us, there's a lot of leverageable experience, and it's really a matter of unpacking that industry and understanding what the translations are from what you've done in the past to what you'd like to do in the future and the impact that you'd like to have. We're close to the top of the hour, and I'm just peeking through a couple of the chats now because I haven't been able to look through all of those. I think that Kayla has handled most of these questions already. Kayla, is there anything that you see that I've missed?
Yeah, there was one from Karen. She said, Cindy, do you have examples of good sizzle resumes? I know that I'm definitely in the IMDb category, but struggle on how to reformat, organize.
That's a great question. Thanks for highlighting that one. It really depends on the audience. So I could show you a resume, but without knowing who you're trying to attract, it's not necessarily going to be the right thing for them. So what I'd suggest is really, going through that practice of unpacking. And I try to I try not to share, the great resume. We do share in the career resources a template. It's pretty blank. It's a structure because, and I mentioned this earlier, the movie previews my son might be excited about, or that my friends might be excited about, or that I might be excited, they're all going to be different movies. So what is it that particular organization finds really important? What is it that they care about? What are they posting about on LinkedIn? I talked to someone a couple of months ago who was going for an interview, and he hadn't noticed that the company webpage had a profile of the plant that he was going to go interview in. And one of the people that he was actually going to interview with was profiled in that article. Those types of things give a lot of clues in terms of the language and the things that people care about. So it's really, when we tell and it's descriptive in that way, it's much different than when we're actually in the space of story. So I guess the last thing I can say about that, Karen, is to think about what are the problems that you would be helping to solve and work towards in that organization, and how do you share the story, not having it be about the stage that you used to be on, but setting it up so that they can kind of participate in the story with you. I experienced problems like these, and here's how I thought about it, and here's what what we considered and what the result was. And you're welcome to make an appointment with me. One of the things that's sometimes useful is to bring a job description, even if it's something that is closed currently. I'm excited about things like these. We can start to unpack it a little bit, and I can give you some hints about how we might structure some of your prior experience to be really attractive. Kayla, was there anything else?
No, I think we're at time.
Awesome. Well, if I missed anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and make a coaching appointment. I did see the LinkedIn course. If you're not an SOM alum, you can find the course. It's simply go to the page linkedinguys.com, I think is the page. And it will just be a little bit more expensive for you. For SOM people, there's a link that makes it very cost effective. And I'm seeing thank yous, and I think that's it for today. I'm really glad that you spent some time with me. I hope you found this useful, and I hope that you have some really solid actions to take as a result of our time together today.